up YouTube? This is Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads and your front brake rotors on a 2014 Hyundai Accent. Now, one of the first things I like to do is push this caliper piston back in by prying a screwdriver in this opening and wedging against the pad and the body of the caliper to push that caliper piston back in. But before we do that, let's take a look under the hood. Just take the cap off of your master cylinder right here, and sometimes these little rubber parts bulge in. Just press that back in, and we can see over here on the side that we're at least an inch below the max level. So there's enough room inside the master cylinder reservoir for me to be able to push that caliper piston and allow that fluid to come back up through the system without overflowing and making a mess. If this were full, you could use a turkey baster or something similar. Even a rolled up paper towel will help wick that old fluid out of there and make room for the fluid that you're going to be pushing back from the caliper. Okay, once you verify that the master cylinder fluid level has got some room, we can just take a regular flathead screwdriver and come in and pry through this little opening in the side of the caliper. The intent is just to push this caliper piston back in. See, there it goes. Now you can also see I've got the wheel turned to the right. It just makes it a little bit easier to access everything. And of course you turn it to the left when you do the driver's side. But now that we've got that caliper piston pushed back in, you can see the caliper's got a little bit more travel in there, more play. And that's going to allow room for the thickness of the new pad and the new rotor. Okay, now we can loosen and remove the upper and lower caliper bolts. And those are a 14 millimeter. You can use a socket or a wrench, but they go into these slide pins, and the slide pins will sometimes spin, which won't allow you to loosen them. So you may end up needing a 17 millimeter open end wrench, and just make sure you find one with a thin profile, otherwise it won't fit in here. I tried another wrench and it didn't fit, but sometimes they don't move at all. Do the same with the one down here. That's what those guys look like. Just set those aside. We will need to reuse those. Then we can take off the caliper, and I'm just going to use a regular little bungee cord here. Loop that up around the shock or the spring here, and just hold it up out of the way. Just like that. I've just got that bungee cord looped on just to hold that caliper. Then we can just pull out the old pads. Sometimes a screwdriver helps pry them out. And then next we're going to pull off this caliper support bracket. See if I can't show you over here on the side. We've got these two larger bolts here in the back. It's a 17 millimeter bolt. This is a real handy long-handled wrench I picked up, a long-handled socket wrench. 3/8 drive, I really like it. Well, once you break those loose, we'll just take them out. Some manufacturers use a little bit of Loctite here. This one has actually got a lock washer, so just keep in mind, don't lose that. But we will be reinstalling that as well. It's a good idea to have one hand hold that caliper bracket while you loosen the last bolt so that you don't drop it. Although dropping it would help knock off some of the rust and the dust, so whatever. Now before we can take off the rotor, you can see there's these two Phillips head screws that are holding it on to the hub, and it's pretty common to strip those. I've found if you get an impact screwdriver, one where it's got this metal end and you can hit it with a hammer, that seems to help break them loose a little bit. Just give it a few taps. It also tends to seat the Phillips into the screw, or it seats the end of the screwdriver in there a little bit stronger. And then I continue to apply pressure here. I'm going to use some leverage here, just put a wrench on the screwdriver, see if I can't break that loose. There we go. we do need to reuse these. As long as they're not damaged, that's okay. Same with this other one here. Got it. Well, that's nice. When they strip, it's a little bit of a pain. You gotta sometimes drill them out and get new ones, but there we go. Now the rotor's still stuck to the hub here, just from all that heat and a little bit of rust. It's kind of bonded itself there, so you can just give it a tap at the top or bottom a couple times and I'll usually knock it loose. One tap worked. Now before I put the new rotor on, I like to clean up the hub just a little bit and get some of this rust off of there so that it will fully seat on that hub. Now the new rotor comes pretty well coated in some of this oil for packaging. I guess that prevents it from rusting. So you want to hit that with some brake cleaner and just get all that stuff off of there before we put it on. And then just go ahead and put it back on. Line up those two Phillips screws. Get them started. I've heard some people saying they don't put these back in, they just use the lug nuts to hold it on, and they say something about these screws are just for manufacturing, but I figured they're there, so we'll put them back on. That's good enough. This kit comes with new hardware, these new pad retainer clips, so we're going to replace those as well. So in our caliper bracket here, just pull off the old clips, and then I like to hit that also with a wire brush. I am also going to clean and re-grease these slide pins, so I'm going to pull these out one at a time. If I can, just kind of pull back on that boot, just wipe off that old grease. And then I'm going to put some of this syl-glide on there. That's my preferred brake grease, even though they haven't sent me any for free yet. Sure would be nice. So I'm just going to kind of spread that around on that slide pin, and then just pop it right back in. Just kind of pops in around that boot. The excess grease, you can kind of just wipe it on the boot. It helps keep it from drying out and cracking. Do the same thing with the other one here. And don't get these mixed up. You see this one's got a little rubber grommet at the end. So, same thing, just wipe it off. Get it all clean. You know, if these are really dirty, sometimes I'll put them back in and out a few times to try to clean out the caliper bracket, the little insert where this goes. But these aren't terrible, and they're not dried out or anything. Just kind of spread that around like so, and put it right back in. Alright, let's just go ahead and rehang the caliper bracket. So grab those 17mm bolts here and just kind of hold that up and get those started. Make sure you still have the lock washer on there. I'm going to use my old school torque wrench on these. The spec that I found was 73 foot-pounds. now we can put our new shims back in. Sometimes they snap right in, and sometimes they don't. This one is not wanting to go in too easily, but if you kind of like, sometimes you just have to bend them a little bit or get them to press in down here. There we go. The main thing is that they're seated properly and that they're not going to scratch on the rotor. Same thing with this top one here. Just kind of pry it in there. It looks like this with these ones. I'm having to pry between the rotor, the outside edge of the rotor here, to get it to go all the way in. Sometimes they fight you a little bit, but as long as it's seated and not going to scratch on the rotor, that's really that's the key. So that looks good. So before I put the pads in, I'm just going to put a little bit of this syl-glide brake grease on the back. Just a thin layer is enough, and then a little bit at either end. Well, I guess that's a good amount at either end. Just make sure you don't get any on the surface of the pad, and then we can put this over here. Just kind of line it up in that clip. Same thing with the outer pad, just a couple little dabs of that grease. Spread that around. Get the ends here. The ends are what slide in and out of these little pad retainers there, so they need some grease as well. Make sure you don't get any on the rotor or the surface of the pad. If you do, you can wipe it off or clean it off. And then same thing, just line that up. Press it in place just like that. Now the caliper up here, you can see that it's mostly pushed back because I used the screwdriver to press that in. If you didn't do that, you can, you don't need to use a screwdriver. You can also take it off and use a C-clamp to press that in, or the brake compression tool that I have. But I like to put a little bit of this syl-glide grease around on the boot. This caliper boot, they tend to dry out and they'll crack, but if you keep them clean and greased, see, I'm just kind of almost using that syl-glide to clean it and wipe off that excess brake dust and junk that gets in there, and that'll prevent it from binding up and also prevent that boot from drying out. See, this is what I was talking about. This is a caliper compression tool, and it works very similar to a C-clamp. You just put an old pad up there and line this up inside there, just like that, and turn that in. See, it pushed that caliper just a couple more turns. So now I guess it's fully seated. It wasn't completely seated. A little bit of rust in there. Get that out of there. So now we can unhook the caliper, pull off that bungee cord, and just carefully put that back over the pads. You see these slide pins, you might have to pull those a little bit in order to get the caliper to line up. You might have to pull them towards you. And then we can put these bolts back in. I guess they're the caliper slide pin bolts. And remember, those are that's a 14 millimeter. Again, you might need the open end wrench 17 on there to hold that steady while you tighten it. Torque spec on those is 23. They actually give a range, but I think 23 is the high side there. So again, this slide pin may not move, but since it's got fresh grease in there, it is a possibility that it'll spin on you while you're trying to tighten that. And you're done. Just remember to step on the brake pedal once or twice, which will push that caliper piston back out, pressing those pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Double check your master cylinder fluid level. Make sure that that's at the appropriate level before you head out and put the lid back on. And remember to torque everything per spec. Hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll put a link in the description where you can pick up some of that syl-glide, the brake cleaner, that caliper compression tool, and a few other parts as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.